Welcome back to this amazing conversation about the opportunity in warehousing. This is very rarely discussed. It's a new opportunity. Please stay tuned in. This is Pius Moshire Mugo, the Managing Director of Nabo Capital, and we are talking to Richard Howe. Very careful about that second name, who is the Managing Director of ALP, Africa Logistics Properties Limited. Richard,
Hi.
Warehousing, it's not many conversations it will come up.
No, I guess that's true. I think people sometimes focus on the more glamorous real estate classes, so trophy five-star hotels, very high-end Waikiki offices, that sort of thing, tend to get a little bit more of the press and attention for obvious reasons.
It's a bit boring.
Warehouses is like sometimes the poor relation of the property industry, but we like them very much for obvious reasons. Yeah.
For some reason, yeah?
Yeah.
So you, Toby, saw an opportunity.
Absolutely.
Are you able to paint a picture of the opportunity that you saw? What was on the ground?
I think the opportunity in many ways is one that we saw when we worked in Raven together. I mean, I think it's basically you've got a society, you've got an economy which has become a proper consumer economy with an emerging middle class, and those sort of economies require decent logistics, a decent supply chain, and modern warehousing is part of that supply chain. And if you go back 3 years when the company was started, you're basically, the warehousing stock in Nairobi was very much what we call go-downs on Mombasa Road, which are very poor quality buildings.
Yeah.
They're the same type of buildings that have been built for many years, and they just simply don't have the specification to meet the requirements of a modern supply chain.
Okay.
They're difficult to access, they don't have the proper facilities to store goods in a safe and consistent way. They need to be used in a very labor-intensive way, and they're very slow, the turnover rates are very difficult, and obviously they're in a part of town which has become extremely congested, and if you're trying to run a supply chain out of a very congested part of town, then that brings its own special difficulties. So the opportunity was bring modern warehouses, modern distribution centres.
Sorry, before you get to modern warehousing, so old-fashioned, inefficient, and inaccessible.
Yeah, and expensive.
And expensive.
Expensive.
And expensive.
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially it. I mean, we don't expect companies to use our warehouses because they're modern or they're what other people have used. I expect them to use them because those buildings are basically cheaper places to store goods. There's lots of other advantages on top of that, but principally, you've got to be able to say to people, look, don't focus on square meter rents, focus on what it costs to store one pallet of whatever it is, orange juice.
Yeah.
How much does that cost in a go down on Mombasa Road? How much does it cost in one of our buildings?
Okay.
And because of the storage densities that you can achieve in a modern warehouse, those costs are lower in our buildings.
Okay.
Yeah. It's not because it's fancy or it's special or it's high tech.
Yeah.
It's about basic economics.
Yeah. Before we go into modern warehousing, what are the critical success factors for
what a modern warehouse?
For modern warehousing.
Right. Okay. Well, I think touching on the first point, A is getting storage density and therefore driving down costs for storage. And the way that a modern warehouse does that is
storage density.
Storage density. So basically driving down the cost of storing your pallet of orange juice while it's in your warehouse. You don't want to be spending any more rent on that than absolutely necessary.
So the higher the density,
the higher the density, the better. The way we get higher density is to build a higher building. So our buildings are what we call a standard Class A building, and that means that there's 12 meters of clear height. So that means that you can get the stuff very high in the building, and this means that in terms of how many pallets you can get per square meter means that the costs come down.
I see.
It's up to individual businesses how dense they want to make that. Some businesses use what we call very narrow aisle and very sophisticated handling equipment, and if you're doing that, then the densities get even higher. But those are different choices for different businesses. Some want a modest density, while some people want a higher density. Depends on the business you're trying to run. But you want to drive down the costs of storage. So that's the first level. And then what you want is you want to be able to turn over your goods quickly and efficiently. And you want your goods to be secure. You don't want them to be damaged. You don't want them to get dust on them. and you want to be able to run a modern warehouse management system so that you know what
Yeah.
those goods are in those buildings. So the building has to be capable of doing all of those things.
You want to turn over your goods
Yeah.
very quickly. Just explain that a little bit.
Right, so if you're a retailer, you're not going to sell those goods while they're sitting in the warehouse.
Yes.
So if you have to have, if they come up the railway and they go into your warehouse, suppose they're an imported good or they're coming from somebody's factories, you put them into your warehouse, they won't get sold while they're sitting in the warehouse. So you want to be able to get them out again quickly. You want to be able to do that very quickly. So in a modern warehouse, what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to take a forklift, go, get your pallet of goods, bring it to the front of the warehouse, put it straight through a modern loading dock, straight into the back of a lorry, put that pallet down, truck drives off to the shop.
Off you
very
go.
quick. There's very used people.
Yeah.
Goods are handled properly with modern equipment all the time so they don't get damaged.
Yeah.
There's a lot less opportunity for them to get lost or damaged in
Yeah.
any way.
Yeah.
And that ensures that your turnover of stock is very quickly.
Yeah.
And you have the right number of docks per to your warehouse to allow that stock to be driven. So the standard for a Class A warehouse is that each 1,000 square meters of space should have one modern loading dock. So my main loading dock is basically where a modern container truck can back up to the building.
Yeah.
The load bed of the truck is level with the building so that a forklift can drive straight into the truck, either to take goods
So
in.
multiple doors.
Absolutely,
are very
multiple
important.
doors
Multiple
across
doors.
the front of the building
Yeah.
to allow that to happen lots of times.
Yeah.
You need a nice big yard
Yeah.
to make sure that every truck can get to every dock,
Yeah.
and that you don't have to wait for another truck to leave before
Yeah.
you can leave.
Yeah,
Your
yeah.
fill, you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you arrive, you can go straight onto a dock. You don't have to wait for somebody else to get out of the way.
I see.
Classic mistake on all those go-down buildings is they're really difficult to get the trucks into.
Mm.
If you want, and then it's really difficult to get the stuff on. It takes
Yeah.
a lot of time, it takes a lot of people, it takes a lot of cost.
Yeah.
So that's a basic fundamental about turnover. Turnover time.
So turnover. What was the third factor?
Well, I think the other third factor is you want your goods to be secure, so the building needs to be secure by
Security.
design.
Yeah.
So our buildings have a proper security barrier all around them. They have security guards on the front, but also the building is designed to have basically just docks access and a very limited one access for employees to come in and out. It's very easy to control the stock and make sure that the stock is there. But the other thing that the logistics experts always say is that you want to touch your stock a minimum number of times, because every time you touch a stock item, there's a chance for it to go to the wrong place, for it to be dropped, for it to be mislaid. So you want to use modern equipment and touch it as many fewer times as possible between receiving it, manufacturing it, and basically the end consumer. And those buildings, by using forklifts and putting things on pallets, that means that those goods they suffer less damage and less loss being handled and rather than all the pallets being broken, every single carton of orange juice being manually handled is bound to increase cost and damage. It just doesn't work.
Any other make or break factor?
Well, I think those are the main things. Those are the main things. I mean, I think it is the ability to store cheaply and basically to turn over that stock quickly.
That stock, yeah. Is location important?
Location is always important.
Always important.
And in terms of the sites that we chose, I think what you're beginning to see as the evolution of Nairobi is that you're now getting a complete set of orbital roads around Nairobi. I mean, they've arrived in a piecemeal fashion, as they always do, but you can see that pattern is there. The logical place to have distribution networks is outside of town on those orbital roads, so that you can access round the town and into the town. No one builds big warehouses in the centre of town. It's a ridiculous place to have them. That's for offices, for homes, retail, all those sort of things in the centre of town. But logistics operations are naturally run on good orbital roads outside of the city.
And what locations in Nairobi would you consider to be most prime for warehousing?
Well, we're obviously biased, but I mean, if you look at Nairobi,
Thank you for your honesty.
If you look at Nairobi, you've got the Mombasa area in terms of where a lot of the storage is at the moment. And if you look at a map, and you just look at a map, you think that's a natural place. But the trouble is that's a very congested part of town. And running a logistics operation out of a very congested, difficult part of town is not the obvious place.
The road is narrow.
The road is narrow. It's full of all sorts of people. You can see that part of town is beginning to change. Yes, once it was natural for it to be an industrial part of town, but you can see it changing into something else as Nairobi grows to absorb it. So the evolution of the cities, as I said, go out to the orbital location. So, Tattoo City, for instance, our first scheme is very close to the Thika Superhighway, so it's an excellent access corridor into town. As the northern bypass is developed, then it gains access round the city as well. And then if you look at our second site, Talisi, which sits right on the road to Naivasha, just outside Nairobi to the west of town, then that gives you excellent access into particularly the retail intensive part of Nairobi, because that tends to be more the western side of town. So as that road is improved by the Chinese refurbishment project, you can see that we will be able to access most of the western town there, but it also has access to the southern bypass. So if you wanted to go from Talisi to the airport, for instance, you just go around the southern bypass quite quickly without messing about in the centre of town and spending a lot of time admiring the CBD.
Yeah. Let's get into modern warehousing. So what is modern warehousing?
So there's a sort of definition of modern warehousing called Class A. It's not really a definition, it varies a little bit on the location. But a Class A warehouse is tall, as we've talked about, so it tends to be at least 10 to 12 metres high, so you can get your storage densities.
What's the standard, the old-fashioned warehouse?
The warehouses on Mombasa Road are probably typically about 7 metres.
7, so almost double of that.
Yeah. And you need to have a very good floor. What I mean by a very good floor is it needs to be strong, because it needs to support all those racks that stand on it. But it also needs to be very flat, because if you're going to have very high racks, you can't have them leaning and wobbling and all that sort of stuff. So the floor needs to be strong, and it needs to be flat, and it needs to be sealed so that it doesn't have any dust on it. So that's very important. It's also important that the floor be flat for all the mechanical handling equipment. So if you've got a forklift or a pallet handler which is powered by batteries, what you don't want is it wearing out batteries as it goes up and down hills and curves. If it's a very flat floor, then you get a lot of mileage out of your forklift while it's moving your goods around the building. So a very good floor is very, very important. It needs to have decent lighting systems, so we put modern LED lighting systems into our space so that whatever the racking pattern, you've always got 200 lux of light in the warehouse. We also take advantage of where Nairobi is on the planet and put lots of daylight harvesting into the roof, so that unless it's a particularly cloudy day, you don't even need the lights to get to that level of needs a modern fire system. International businesses have insurance standards, and that means that you've got to have a proper fire system in that building. You need to have a big yard. So people are always very surprised when I say, when we buy a land plot and we only fill half of it with building. So half of the land plot is actually yard.
I see.
Which seems a very expensive thing to do, but it's very, very important, because that means that all of the docks on the front of the building or the side of the building, wherever the docks are independent, so that you have lots of manoeuvring space. Every single dock is independently able to be accessed. And there's plenty of parking space for trucks that are waiting to go onto docks, so that you don't have traffic congestion on your warehouse site. If you begin to creep up above 50% coverage, it's very difficult to design the building where you avoid eventually those sort of traffic jams. And that's what you don't want. If people want to run an efficient supply chain, they want to be able to get the goods into the building and out of the building when they think they're going to get it out of it. And that large yard is very important. And you want the yard to be proper. You want the yard to be a proper concrete yard. You don't want it to be these nice wonky concrete blocks that disappear as soon as... Because if you take a modern 40-foot truck, power steering on it is a terrible force. It will rip tarmac to bits. It will rip standard block paving to bits. So you need to put a proper concrete yard into it so that it doesn't happen. These are all things that you need to think about in terms of making those.
And of course, security.
Security is very important. Both going into the building, but also into the warehouse park itself. So you need a proper fence. You need a proper security guys. But you need the security to be configured so that it works quickly. So we invest in things like number plate recognition systems, RFID cards, so that known users and registered users can get through the gates quickly. You don't want to stand there every truck's taking 10 minutes while people write down the number plate in a notebook. I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
That's not modern logistics.
Yeah. So I want to imagine that the building has to be almost central. Or how do you?
The building needs, basically it needs to be slightly offset. So you have the building and you have a yard in front of it. So
Okay.
If you're dealing with 40-foot shipping containers, the trucks are a fair size. So, and you then need the yard to have sufficient space so that the truck can then move away from the dock and turn without disturbing the trucks that are parked either side of it.
Yeah.
That's what drives the size of the yard.
I see.
So basically, you have the warehouse on one side of the land plot and the yard in front of it.
Yeah.
And then maybe some manoeuvring or a fire truck around the back of the building, depending on the individual circumstances of the site.
There are lots of people who are listening, and they have their own ways of sorting out their storage. Why is this? What benefits can I get if they become one of your tenants or clients?
Well, I mean, as I said, I think our initial pitch to people is always, it's not because it's modern, it's not because it's special, it's not because it's used in Europe, it's because it will save you money.
It will save you money.
And it saves you money in two ways. One is it makes your storage costs lower simply because of the height and the storage sense of the building. And the second is it makes your turnaround times and your logistics better in lots of different ways. So, and everybody wants to turn over their stock. If a business has money invested in slow-moving stock, that means it's making less money. It's got to absorb. You can go bankrupt by having too much money in your stock. So
absolutely.
you don't. You want your stock to turn over as quickly as possible. The objective is not to fill the warehouse. The objective is to get the stocks going backwards and forwards through the warehouse as quickly as possible.
I see. So it will save them money.
Yes,
that's the point.
That's it.
And there are of course other people who are watching and they're saying, okay, this warehousing concept sounds interesting. Is there money in warehousing?
Yeah. I'm sure. I mean, we talked about.
Is it too early for me to ask?
No, absolutely. I mean, I'm not running a charity. We're here to make money. And I think warehouses have made lots of money, particularly in recent years. I mean, we talked at the beginning of the conversation about how this isn't perhaps the most glamorous of the real estate classes. But certainly in the last decade and a half, it's been the most profitable out of the asset classes, without any shadow of a doubt. And I'm talking globally here, not particularly with East Africa.
Warehousing has been the most
absolutely
successful.
Yep. Without a shadow of a doubt. And that's driven largely from the internet, because of course, traditionally warehouses would just serve a traditional retail organization where they would take down stuff to the stores. But the internet brings giant organizations like Amazon. To go to an Amazon warehouse is to be truly blown away. I mean, these things are huge and massive. But it's not just Amazon. Every e-business needs warehousing, and every retailer needs warehousing. So in terms of starts and investments, lease durations, you read a lot, if you read the property press, about how shopping malls in the United States are in terminal decline. What's not in terminal decline in the United States is warehousing, where if you look at lease durations, which is usually a sign that people have confidence and want to lock up those assets, are actually growing in warehouses. Vacancy rates in European warehousing runs at about 3%. It's incredibly low.
Wow.
Yeah. So in terms of recent profitability, unquestionably warehousing is I would say the most profitable real estate class of recent years, driven largely through the internet.
We've got to pause there.
Okay.
You've had it. Warehousing is the most profitable sub-asset class within the real estate asset class. If you want to know more, please stay tuned in as we dive into what exactly ALP have been doing in Kenya. They have two amazing projects that they've already launched. We'll talk more about it. Stay tuned in.